I've always been interested in those who've been very successful, like Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs. They were great innovators, and you have to wonder what makes some innovators so great and others not so great. Well, what we've concluded over the years is it's really a matter of perspective. This is a way of thinking about and understanding something that's very complex. Albert Einstein, for example, was famous for his thought experiments where he'd sit on a picture himself sitting on a beam of light shooting across the sky. And what he saw changed the way we think about the world of physics. Well, I like thinking about jobs to be done as a lens as well. It's a perspective that allows aspiring innovators to think differently about markets and customers and competitors and needs. And in doing so, become much more effective at innovation, making their efforts much more profitable and predictable. Companies who are adopting this, they see the value of taking a different view. You have a choice. You can look at the market through the lens of the drill maker, or you could look at the market through the lens of the hole maker. One is a product perspective, the other is a problem perspective. And this is exactly what we're suggesting. You have a choice. You can see the world through the lens of the drill maker or the hole maker. And we're going to recommend that you look at the world through the lens of the hole maker. Right? So when we think about this lens, the first thing that becomes obvious is why we create products to begin with. People buy products and services because they're trying to get some job done, whether it's to create a quarter control or pass on life lessons to children or to repair a rotator cuff. They're trying to get some type of job done. And those jobs can be tasks, they could be goals and objectives they're trying to achieve, problems that they're trying to resolve or avoid. It could be anything that helps them make progress in their lives. So as we start thinking about these jobs, this gives way to a new language for innovation as well, because what we're asking to do is to make the job itself the unit of analysis. So we're not going to study the customer. We're not going to study the product. What this means is when you go talk to customers, you're not going to talk to them about their products. You're going to talk to them about what they're trying to achieve, their underlying job to be done. Now, this language is helpful across every part of the innovation process. When you look at the market definition through a customer or a company lens, I should say, through a company lens, um, markets are defined around verticals, products, uh, use cases, demographics, price points, a whole variety of things. And when you look through the market, when you try to define a market through the company lens, it's really difficult to see the best way to define a market. But when you look at this through a jobs to be done lens, it becomes much more obvious. And this is why we define a market as a group of people trying to get a job done. This makes sense, right? Because people are buying products to get a job done. We're just going to define the market as the group of people who are buying the products to get that particular job done. Now, with that, we can define markets in a way that become stable over time and make great focal points for value creation efforts. We see the same thing when it comes to customer needs. How do you define customer needs currently? As solutions, as benefits, as requirements, exciters, delighters, and so on? As we did in the poll, we saw that 66% of you don't agree or work on teams that don't agree on what a customer need even is. So this begs the question, how are you going to be successful in innovation if your team can't agree on what a need is? Because where they have to go from there is to agree on what the customer's needs are and which of those needs are unmet. And if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, all that has to happen before they can come up with the right solution and the best solution to solve the customer's problems. But when looking at this through a jobs to be done lens, what a need should be becomes much more obvious. We define a need as the measurable outcomes that people are trying to achieve as they go about and get a job done. Just like when you prepare a meal, for example, you want to minimize the time it takes to cook the meal. You want to minimize the likelihood of overcooking or undercooking. The good news here, too, is these needs are knowable. There's no such thing as latent needs and needs that customers can't articulate. That's all happening in solution space when the product is the unit of analysis. When the jobs unit of analysis, you have a much more effective approach at understanding and capturing the customer's needs. We can see here this brief example This comes from completion engineers who are trying to extract oil from an unconventional reservoir, which I think is an interesting example here, very technical in nature. And you can see that these statements are very detailed. We'll get into this in more detail a little bit later in the presentation, but these aren't your average need statements that you might be used to, and we'll explain why. Once you know what the needs are, then you can figure out which of those needs are unmet. We're going to define an unmet need as an important need that's not well satisfied, something that people struggle to achieve. And we'll explain this in more detail a bit later as well. And now we're poised to talk about something that's very interesting, the way companies segment the market. And we saw in this poll here that roughly 60% of you say there isn't agreement on your product teams as how to best to segment a market. Are they segmented around personas or use cases or people with different attitudes or different demographics and so on? When you look at segmentation from a company lens, it's hard to figure out how to best segment a market. But when you're looking at the market through a jobs to be done lens, again, the answer becomes much more obvious. What we're trying to do are come up with segments of people in the market, each that have a different set of unmet needs. We're trying to find segments of people with different unmet needs. And when you segment the market around needs, you can actually find these segments of people. And we'll talk about this in more detail as well. Well, as you see all these pieces come together, you can see that innovation doesn't have to be an unpredictable process. It doesn't have to be art. It can be turned into a science, but it takes a different perspective. And as we think about innovation, we're going to define innovation as the process of devising a solution that gets the job done better and or more cheaply, quite simply, right? So this just means we can find ways to get a job done better or more cheaply or both.